now I would like to invite, I think, one of the best dressed men in India, Nishant Balashamogam. Yes? So Nishant, please. So we have a lot of things in common with Nishant because he's traveling around the world also, yes, and we are meeting at different continents in Germany and other countries, and also he's meeting with other speakers around the world, yes, and he's one of the biggest ambassadors of hydrogen, especially of green hydrogen, yes, clean hydrogen in the country. So now I would like to ask you for introductory, yes, keynote address. Actually, it should be before Dr. Rashi, but you know, we always give a floor to women. So, Nishant, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Thomas for having me here and all of y'all who've gathered for this wonderful session this morning. So, my name is Nishant Balashanmugam. It's a little difficult last name, but I think Thomas did well pronouncing that. I'm from the Green Hydrogen Organization. The Green Hydrogen Organization is a global nonprofit that is focused only on green hydrogen, right? We heard several other clean hydrogen and biomass-based hydrogen, et cetera, coming to discussions this morning. But what we focus on is green hydrogen. And even before I start, I'd like to tell you why green hydrogen and not blue or any other color, and why we don't like, the clean hydrogen targets being set as against green hydrogen targets. Because green hydrogen is the only way you can mass produce hydrogen to meet the global demand for hydrogen, whereas other forms cannot be done at that scale, number one. And number two, blue hydrogen and derivatives have the potential to be more carbon intensive than green, right? And there's methane leakages and so on and so forth. So we try to focus on green hydrogen, and the three of the biggest work streams that we have is first is enabling environment, second is capacity building and market creation. So what we do is we work with governments across the world, policymakers, institutions, academia, and so many others to ensure that there is a robust policy environment for green hydrogen production and scaling. I'm just trying to figure out how to use this. Okay, there you go. Well, if I knew what Mika was presenting, I might have skipped all of this. But this, again, is the global outlook for hydrogen. And as many of you all know that the whole green hydrogen revolution in India only started a few years ago, right? When Prime Minister Modi on Independence Day in 2021, made the announcement. Until then, hydrogen wasn't a big focus in India, but there was small pockets of hydrogen development since the 1990s. And I think in the early 2000s, you had the fuel cell revolution, but India never took off. But why is it important for India today? Is because for India, we import more than $80 to $100 billion of natural gas or coal from which we make hydrogen. So that is costing us a lot on our foreign exchange reserves, our current account deficits. Number two, we signed the Paris Agreement to reduce carbon emissions. And we are 9 years ahead of that already. But in spite of that, India wants to meet its NDCs and be committed to climate. So that's not reason number two. Number three, this gives us energy security, right? We've been importing a lot of fuels. And even 5 years ago, if somebody told you that India will be exporting energy, you would not have believed. But today, when I tell you in 5 years or in 10 years, India will export energy, it's going to become a reality. And that's the kind of catalytic change green hydrogen can make to India's economy. So let's look at the global outlook. But before this, we need to always remember why we're doing green hydrogen. Green hydrogen today is somewhere around $5, right? Some projects are looking at $4, some even lower, but roughly around $5. Gray hydrogen is available at $1.5. Now, why am I asking you to buy your iPhone for $5,000 when it costs you $1,200? It's It's only because of climate change. Green hydrogen has the potential to reduce carbon emissions by a huge margin, and it's the only solution to almost 18% of the world's carbon emissions, right? So in hard-to-abate industries, you do not have another solution. So that's why green hydrogen. So when you start looking at the global outlook for hydrogen, by 2030, they estimated around 100 million tons of hydrogen to be consumed. And 2023, we already saw a demand of 97 million tons per annum. So by 2030, we'll be looking at least 150 million tons of hydrogen. Now, most of this demand today is concentrated only in the refineries and chemical sector, which includes fertilizers, which is a major chunk. But hydrogen has the potential to decarbonize so many more industries, which is transport. Everyone's been talking about transport and hydrogen cars, hydrogen buses. But we need to, again, revisit why we are doing this and focus our efforts, focus our capital towards decarbonizing hard-to-abate industries where there's no solution available. So FIDs doubled. You heard that from Miko as well. About 3.5 million metric tons by 2030. This is how much, announced capacities have reached FIDs. Europe's FID for green hydrogen or clean hydrogen projects is at 2 gigawatts. India is at 1.3 gigawatts already. So this very figure demonstrates how fast India is moving in this whole hydrogen space. Of course, China has FID for 20 gigawatts, and Miko also made it evident that China has about 60% of the world's electrolyzer capacities. And China, why is China 60% ahead of everybody else? It's because China invested in developing R&D for hydrogen and electrolyzers way back in 2016. So it's taken them 7 years to get here, but we're only 2 years into the game, and we're doing fairly well. Now, by 2030, they have about 520 gigawatts of announced capacities to come online. India is targeting between 60 to 100 gigawatts based on whatever technology we use in our electrolyzers, but the government's target is 5 million tons. To achieve what we've announced, just what we've announced, we have to grow at 90% a year starting next year, right? So that is much higher than even how solar grew in its peak days. So this is only for announced capacities, and this is not even in accordance to climate goals and climate ambitions, right? So the business opportunity is here. Whatever you saw in solar, you're going to see 5x, 10x of that in green hydrogen and its allied sectors. Well, where are the concerns now, right? We saw about 520 gigawatts worth of electrolyzer capacities coming online by 2030. But where is the demand? If you ask a green hydrogen developer, I know most of them, I don't see many of them in the room today, but if you ask them what's their biggest concern, is who's going to buy their green hydrogen? And how would you make or force somebody to buy a product that's 3 times more expensive? Just by putting in mandates, by having a favorable policy environment, and giving incentives. So in the demand side, what you can see here is EU is leading the way, right? EU has quite a lot of policy actions that are supporting or creating visibility for green hydrogen. And one of that is the EU Maritime Act, which is looking at blending fuels in ships by 2% from 2025 up to 6% by 2030, and in aviation fuels 2% to 70% by 2050. 2% starting from 2025. So you see already by 2025 there's visibility that there is going to be a demand. These consumers will be forced to buy. Next is RED III. It's not passed as a law yet, but this is under discussion in the parliament, I believe. And over there, they are mandating 42% use of hydrogen by 2030, right? Rising to 60% by 2035. This, again, creates visibility, and there's a market. If you look at global offtake agreements, most of the offtake agreements are centered in Europe just for these reasons. In India, we don't have any demand-side mandates yet. The government deliberated over it, but of course, for various reasons, we decided not to go forward with demand-side mandates, but India decided to give demand-side incentives. And under the site scheme, component 2, mode 2A and 2B, they're looking at 550,000 tons of ammonia, but that is only 2.6% of what we consume, right? For green hydrogen to be used in oil refineries, they're looking at 200,000 metric tons per annum, and our consumption is 3 million tons, so that's 6.7%. This, again, is a minuscule amount of incentives that is being given, and it trickles down, and it's not even for the 10-year period, it's for 3 years. So has India done enough? Definitely not. We don't have mandates. We don't have incentives that compare to what the EU or the US is providing. So we spoke about demand signals. Next is regulatory uncertainties, because so many of these laws, they are being passed, and then what happens is governments sometimes dial down the targets, sometimes they scrap these mandates. It's a broken, uneven landscape for definitions and what qualifies as green hydrogen. Everyone has their own geopolitical interest. Everybody has their own, industry interests. Therefore, there is no common definition for green hydrogen and what would qualify as green hydrogen. India has announced a policy and announced a certification scheme, and right now they just closed the rounds for consultation. And India is looking at 2 tons of emissions per ton of green hydrogen. And for those of you who are not in the industry, to give you a little bit of a background why this matters, is because traditional conversion methods of hydrogen produce up to 12 tons of carbon emissions per ton of hydrogen. Whereas in green hydrogen made from electrolyzers, it's 0 in the actual production phase, but you have some allied emissions coming from your renewable energy to your transport. So 2 tons per ton of hydrogen for India is very lenient as well. And this is where the question of other clean hydrogen fuels will raise a debate, because carbon capture rates are not proven. Everybody has different rates. There's methane leakages coming from the upstream. So these are all concerns for climate, and we're doing all of this for climate. Next is licensing and permitting. Licensing and permitting for renewable energy itself is a big concern, and the country where you have the biggest problems is the UK. Can anybody guess how long it takes to get a permitting for a renewable energy project in the UK? It's 5 to 7 years, and one project in Scotland for green hydrogen, they were given a waiting period of 9 years, right? Can anybody guess in India? Maybe Anuj is here. How much does it take for your solar project? 6 months, 9 months at the most, right? That's 10% of what you see in the UK. And in the US, it's about 3 to 5 years. You saw that on Miko's slides. So this is another reason why India will do and fare better, and I will show you more proof of that. Today, India's renewable energy installments is 207 gigawatts. We are going at almost 2.5 to 2 gigawatts of installed capacity every month, and our target is 500 by 2030. And 2 years ago, if you asked me, I thought we were never going to reach it. But we are going at a faster pace, and we will reach our targets by 2030 as well. I've mentioned about loose emissions accounting, right? This is such a contrast to what's happening in East Asia and Japan and Korea, where they don't want to worry about what are the emissions. They want hydrogen, and they want it now. Whereas in the EU, it's very strict, right? It's a complete contrast. And India is trying to be in the middle somewhere. Technology risks. You saw in one of the earlier slides about all the different electrolyzer technologies. And of course, alkaline is the oldest, and it has operating data, right? But when you start looking at PEM and large PEM electrolyzers, you don't have as much operating data. So the technology is not proven. So as a financier, I'm not going to fund your project for 12 years and 15 years when I do not have operational data of your electrolyzer. So there's a significant technology risk. And this is something we are trying to address as the Green Hydrogen Organization.